Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of the Zoology Podcast. So, on today's episode, I've got something fantastic, something that really intrigues me and fascinates me, and it's on one of my favourite animals on the entire planet. It's on the New Caledonian crow. Now, these birds continue to blow my mind, so I thought I would bring to you today a piece of research that really shows just how crazy clever these birds are. And this is a piece of research that was first published in November 2020. Its lead researcher was a Dr. Markus Boeckle of the Karl-Leinsteiner University of Health and Sciences in Austria. Dr. Boeckle and colleagues, they did a fascinating piece of research on the New Caledonian crow. And what they were trying to see is if this crow can not only learn to use different types of tools, but then anticipate for that tool use in the future. So how did they do that? Well, it's really interesting. So what they first did is they got together 9 crows from Grand Tier in New Caledonia. And these 9 crows were 4 females called Mercury, Neptune, Triton and Uranus, and 5 males called Io, Jupiter, Mars, Saturn and Venus. Now, Neptune, Triton, Jupiter, Mars and Venus were juveniles or under a year old, while Mercury, Io, Saturn and Uranus were adults thought to be over the age of 2 years old. And an interesting thing is that only 4 of these birds passed into the actual experimental testing phase of this research, and only 3 actually made it all the way through. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's pull it back a bit and we'll go through what actually happened. So what did Dr. Boeckle and his colleagues do? Well, first what they wanted to do is they wanted to train the birds to see if they were able to solve a specific type of apparatus. Now, they were given 3 apparatuses to train on. One was a dispenser apparatus. What I want you to imagine here is a box type of design in which in one end of the box you could insert an object, and then by inserting that object it would trigger an internal sensor which would then release food into the bottom of the apparatus. Now, to solve the dispenser apparatus, the bird was trained to use a hook to put into the apparatus to trigger the sensor which would then release the food. The next apparatus was called the collapsible platform apparatus. Now this was if you can imagine it was a box with an internal collapsible platform. To get access to this platform, there was a tube that the bird could put things in. So this tube was designed so that the stones that the bird would be given later on would be able to fit through the tube, land on the collapsible platform within the box, collapse this platform, and then release the food that was inside. So that's pretty cool. The third apparatus was called the horizontal perspex tube. And that's exactly what it says. It was a piece of perspex tube that was horizontal, and for the bird to be able to get the food that was inside, it would need to use a stick to go from one end of the tube and push the stick into the tube, which would then force the food out the other side, and therefore it could eat the tasty food. Brilliant. So that's what we've got. We've got the dispenser apparatus, the collapsible platform apparatus, and the horizontal perspex tube. So the birds were trained to be able to solve all 3 of these apparatus. They all pretty much were able to do that, so that's brilliant. But then, where did this go on to? Well, this went on to the training phase. In this phase, they learnt a temporal sequence. So they learnt that after one event happens, another event will precede it, and then again another event will precede that. So A happens, and B happens, and C happens, and they were basically trained that this is how this goes within the experimental context. So to do this, the researchers used 2 rooms that were connected to each other, but did not allow for visual access when the door of the rooms were closed. So when the birds were in one room and the door was closed, they couldn't see into the other. Now that's really important. So room 1 held the tube apparatus, and inside it was a high-valued food item for the crows. This tended to be meat. The birds were left in this room for 1 minute. Now, this was so they could get used to the room, but also so that they would be able to see if they could put in their memory that this apparatus was located in this room with this specific reward in it. After this, the birds were moved to the adjacent room, room 2, and then the door between the rooms was closed, so the birds now located in room 2 alone could no longer see into room 1 with the apparatus and the food reward. So, in their heads, does that food reward disappear or not? Well, we're going to find out. So after 5 minutes in room 2, the crows would then be presented with a presentation box. And in this box it contained 5 different objects. One was a stick, which could be used to solve the perspex tube apparatus. The next was a hook, which could be used to solve the box apparatus. The third was a stone, which could obviously be used to solve the collapsible platform. The fourth was a distractor object, which was a ball, so that could be used for playing with. And the fifth was a small piece of apple, so this was a low value food item for the crows. They were normally fed this during their everyday meals, so they knew they could definitely eat this item. So now an interesting thing is the position of all the objects were randomized within the box. So every time they went through the trials to learn this sequence, they weren't just picking the same item just because they knew the item furthest to the left was the correct one to go for. No, because that item could always change. So the stick item would always change. In one trial, where the stick item could be the ball in the next trial, or maybe the piece of apple in the third. So it was randomized. So the crows actually had to think about what items were what. So after they were presented with this box of items, they had to make a choice. Now, once they picked up an item, the rest of the items would then be removed. So they would learn that once they pick something up, this is the item that they get to keep within the room. And after this, 10 minutes was then let to go by, so the birds were left alone with just that item for 10 minutes in room 2. And once that was over, the door would then be reopened, allowing them back access to room 1, where the apparatus would be. They were then able to take the tool they had chosen, take it into that room, and if it was the correct tool, use that to get the high-valued food reward within it. During this training, they were only ever trained with the Perspex tube, never the other apparatus, which is the important thing. They were only ever trained with the tube, so if they picked the stick from the room, they could then take it into the other room and use that to get the high-valued food reward within it. Now, an interesting thing is that sometimes during this, the higher valued meat would actually be replaced with a bit of apple. So during the first phase, when they were left alone in the room for 1 minute with the tube apparatus, it would hold an apple. They would then be moved into the second room, and obviously the door would be closed, and then after 5 minutes, the box would be brought out. Now, in this box, in replace of the apple, would be the high valued food reward, would be the meat. So in this instance, if the crows were actually thinking about what they were doing, they would think, oh, the meat is now here. I know that the apple is in the other room. Well, I don't want the apple, I want the meat, so I'll just take the meat. And if they did that, then that trial would be over, because they've clearly chosen the better outcome for them. So, 4 of the 6 crows tested were actually able to make the correct choice. They were able to learn this sequence, meaning that they were consistently able to memorize the apparatus with the high value food reward, then pick the stick within the next thing, hold on to the stick, and then take it back once the room was open, and use it to acquire the food. And amazingly, it only took them 22 trials on average to learn this temporal sequence, which is kind of crazy for a little bird, you know? Like, they won't really encounter something like this in the wild, so the fact that they can even learn this is crazy. So the 4 birds that passed this were then put into the proper experiment, in which all 3 apparatuses were used. So in the first training bit, as I said, only the tube apparatus was used, which only needed the stick to solve it. But now they're going to encounter all 3 apparatuses, which had previously been trained on. But the important thing to remember is that they had never encountered either the collapsible platform or the box apparatus within the temporal sequence. So this means that if crows were choosing at chance, they would only get it right about 20% of the time, given that there are 5 items to choose from. But if they weren't choosing by chance, and if they were specifically picking the right tool to solve the right job, this would mean that when they've encountered, say, the collapsible platform apparatus in the first stage, they would then be remembering what was there and what food item was in it, once they had gone to the second stage and once the door had been closed so they could no longer see. They would then be making the connection that they want to get that high food reward in the future, and they anticipate, due to the temporal sequence training, that they would encounter this apparatus again in the future, and therefore they would pick the correct tool for the job, in this case a stone. So they would pick the stone and then wait. And then once that door was opened, as they anticipated, they would then take the stone, fly over to the apparatus, deposit it, collapse the platform, and get the high valued food reward, which is just crazy levels of thinking. So the fact that they can do this, that they can anticipate that they're going to encounter something like this in the future, is just mind-blowing to me. So the actual results were that 3 out of the 4 tested crows performed significantly above chance. One subject scored a 9 out of 10. They performed this in 10 trials, and they got it right 9 out of 10 times. And 2 of the other subjects got it right 7 out of 10 times. So they've really picked up on this quick. The fact that they never even saw the other 2 apparatus within the trials, yet 9 out of 10 and 7 out of 10 times they got it right, really gives us some evidence that they've been able to make the association between the temporal sequence and being able to put in the apparatus they've never seen into that sequence, and that they can abstract out that if they've encountered a similar previous thing in the past, that they then may be encountering something similar in the future when the other apparatuses are present. And this is just crazy. The fact that these birds can even do this just blows my mind, and I really wanted to share this with, well, whoever's going to listen, with you all. Because these birds have an insane level of sophistication within their intelligence. And I really think that this study shows that these new Caledonian crows can learn to use not only novel tools to prepare for a specific anticipated event, but they're also able to use tools that don't even exist in the wild, and no wild new Caledonian crows have been observed using stone-like tools or stones to acquire food. But they can do this in captivity if given the chance to learn how to do so. And I think the key thing this study reveals is that the crows not only picked a tool that they had learned how to previously use and previously turned out to be useful, but they picked a tool that was specific to a specific future anticipated task they thought they were going to be a part of. And this really puts them as a prime candidate for testing things such as mental time travel. That's the ability to be able to project oneself into the future in one's mind. These birds are going to be a fascinating subject in future research, and honestly, I just can't wait. I know this has been a short episode this month, but I really thought that this research was just fantastic. I highly recommend that everyone goes and read the paper. For me, it's just mind-blowing. Thank you all for listening. Until next time, I've been Samuel Richardson, and ciao for now.